Welcome to Waiting on the Trade, a monthly comics book club for people who can't keep up with monthly comics. I'm Matt Ledger.
I'm Patrick Fitzgerald Fleck.
And I'm Callum Smith.
This month we're talking about Geis, A Matter of Life and Death, the fantastic first chapter of creator Alexis Deacon's Eurocomic Come Tournament manga.
It's pronounced Gesh.
Yeah.
Oh god,
I was just about to jump in with that as well.
So in case you need a refresher, Gesh is the story of a kingdom in need of a ruler and the magical contest held to find said ruler. However, what the contestants don't know is that they're competing for not just a kingdom, but for their very lives. Which is a little dark, but it seems like it might turn out okay. We're only not even a third of the way through it, because apparently book 2 is longer than this and book 3 is going to be longer than that.
It has to be longer than this, right? We'll get there, but that's what
it's actually kind of breezy, yeah. But before we get into that, Cal, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me. It's very exciting to be back and to talk to somebody from outside of my my immediate household, which feels like a real luxury. So I'm feeling quite giddy, to be honest, already. So I'm very excited about this. Thank you.
Yeah, off mic we were talking about how, Pat, you've not seen anyone in person for the last 5 months.
Our worlds are very small at the moment.
And we were talking about how I'm going to be one of the bad people traveling for Thanksgiving.
He's the problem.
But rather than discuss ethical dilemmas, let's discuss ethical dilemmas.
Yeah, fictional ones. My favorite.
Yeah. So, Cal, I believe you bought this book for me last Christmas, if I'm not mistaken.
That sounds very nice of me. That's really good. I do remember getting it for you, but I didn't remember when it was. So that's but no, that sounds about right.
Last year was decades ago, so don't worry.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I'm very pleased if I do, because I think it's a good winter book. It feels, I don't know. I guess we'll get into this a bit later, but it's got a distinctly sort of spooky fairy tale feel, which to me is sort of best consumed during winter. So I'm very pleased to hear that.
Yeah, I was trying to think of how to describe it, and I really do think my description of it is, if Tintin was a Ghibli movie that was a tournament manga, that's what this book is.
That's super interesting to me. Not well for reasons that we can get into a little bit later, I think. But I think, I can understand where each of those elements have come from.
And then I had mentioned to you, because you asked me if I had bought the second one earlier this week, and I said I hadn't, just because the feeling of being able to buy physical books is still new to me, because when we were in California, I knew we were probably going to eventually move back towards the Midwest. So I was limiting my physical book purchases. And then when we moved, obviously everything was kind of in upheaval, and it took me a little bit of time to find a job. So I haven't bought many physical books since we moved back. And I think, Pat, when I was talking to you about this, one of the things you said about it was your favorite thing about it, at least immediately, was the actual book itself, because it's such a good looking volume, the production quality.
Yeah, the binding on this is just, and the thickness, the weight of the paper is good stuff.
I believe you mentioned the smell.
I mean, of course, new book smell. Not as good as old book smell, but it's up there.
I think it's telling that there aren't any digital copies of this book available. You have to get this in print, and I think that you can definitely see why, right? When you're looking at the amount of care and thought that's gone into sort of the production of it as a physical object.
Yeah, which I think I was reading a few interviews this week, and Alexis Deacon, the author-illustrator, said specifically they were happy to work with No Brow Press because all of their books are like that. I don't know, Cal, how much exposure you've had to more of their stuff.
Yeah, quite a lot actually. They're quite a big publisher in the UK, and I've got quite a complicated relationship with them, because on the one hand they've produced a number of books that I really genuinely love. On the other hand, they have a record for having quite sort of aggressive business practices within the sort of the UK comics market. So like I said, I don't have uncomplicated feelings about them as a publisher, but I have very uncomplicated feelings about this book itself, which I love so much. I think it's amazing. So yeah.
How did you find it in the first place?
So a few years ago, I was living in London, and there was a very good bookshop there called Gosh Comics there that I used to go to all the time. And they frequently had sort of launch events for new books. And so I just got in the habit of sort of going to those events when there was a new book coming out. And I went along for the launch event for Geis, and so picked up a copy at that, which I think has since made its way to one of my nieces as a gift. Because I think I've bought this book about sort of four times, because I've gifted it out to various different people. Yes. Anyway, so I went to that launch event, and then I can remember like sort of listening to Alexis Deakin sort of talking about the book, and then sort of reading it on the train ride home, and I suppose, as we might get onto later, just sort of like absolutely devouring it in one sitting, but then finding that it was just a book that I kept coming back to again and again and again, just to sort of reread it and take in more of the details. So that was that was my very first introduction to it.
So how many comics do you think you found at Gosh Comics launch events over the years? Because I feel like this is a very similar story to the 100 Nights of Heroes story we got last time.
Yeah. It's I mean, like I think that they were actually launched very, very like I think that it would have been possibly within months of each other, those two events. And I don't know if you saw this in the back of the book, but there's a Isabel Greenberg, the creator of 100 Nights of Hero, is thanked in the back of this book as well.
Yeah, I noticed that actually.
But yeah, no, quite a few. I think it was it's if you're ever in London, it's honestly like one of my favourite bookshops. It's just I don't know, it's got like the most welcoming and inclusive sort of comics scene that I think I've come across before.
All right, so we heard my pitch of the book, heard Cal's introduction to the book. Pat, what's your pitch of the book, and what was your take on it overall?
It's a fairy tale, basically. It's the story of overcoming an evil force and trying to do good in the face of, bad stuff.
There is bad stuff in this book. There is a surprising amount of genuinely awful stuff, which I really enjoy as well. I think, although I believe I'm 90% sure that I'm right on this. I think Alexis Deakin is from America. I'm almost definite that is the case, but it has like such a distinctly kind of like European fairy tale feel to it, I think, the whole way through.
See, because I thought he had released, well, maybe, I guess this doesn't preclude, neither of those facts precludes the other, but like I thought he had released a bunch of children's books in the UK prior to this.
I think so. Why don't I just double check with my friend Google?
Okay, well, let us know.
Yeah.
I know, Matt, you compared this to a Ghibli film, and I guess I can agree with that, because it's got the same feel of, it's a massive, strange fantasy world, but they're just like skimming the surface. Like Ghibli doesn't explain the characters that you encounter in it. It's a story in that world. In the same way that Gash is like, there's a chieftain who's died, and she's, I guess, made a deal with an evil sorceress.
Yeah, we got to talk about that once Cal gets back from talking with his friend Google, because that's like...
Yeah, sorry, my friend Google indicates that maybe he is actually from the UK. Certainly, he lives in the UK and graduated from a university in England. So neither of which precludes him from being from elsewhere. But
very likely.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry about that, everyone.
No worries.
So, Pat, you were bringing up like one of my main beefs with the book is like
Martaka is a horrible chieftain, and
but like it's supposed to be a great chieftain also, though. So what happened?
I think so. This is me throwing around my privilege of having read the second book, but I think that one of the things I think I completely agree with Pat there in terms of the book doesn't feel the need to kind of explain a huge amount as it goes through. I think it trusts the reader to pick things up from context, or just to kind of go along and like either be comfortable with things being unexplained or to wait for explanations. And the second book provides a significant amount of additional kind of context, and there are characters that seem like there are characters that just appear in a couple of panels in this one who are, say, very prominent in the second book, and the relationships between them really sort of like flesh out and explain a lot more of the world. So I think that it's not necessarily the case that things that don't make intuitive sense right away, like why on earth this deal would have been struck, this genuinely awful deal. Yeah.
So I had two. I don't know why we're starting here because the rest of the book is really good. I had two larger nits to pick with the book overall, and one was that, like, if this is such a great chief, like, why is she making this terrible deal with this sorceress who's going to get 49 people killed, essentially? But I was heartened by the fact that, oh, shoot. I'm trying to names. I have names written down somewhere. With an E. Eloise?
Oh, Eloise, yeah, the sorceress.
Yeah. So Eloise, when she's sent to that cave full of bats, like, also questions that. She's like, my chief, what have you done? So the fact that a character is questioning it, at least, like, the author knows that it's a thing. So I was pretty sure we'd get to it at some point in chapters 2 or 3, and I'm heartened to hear that it seems like it does come up.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that there is also something that I would flag up as well, is that if you look on page 22, where the sorceress is first sort of like detailing like the true nature of the contest, it's made clear that they are bound by the same gesh as everybody else. And if you look at the definition of a gesh on the very first page of the book, I think that to me what that signals is that there is probably more to be. There's probably more to come in story terms about like what, not only kind of like what the consequences of all of the contestants being bound into this contest, but also what are the consequences for the sorceress for being bound into that as well. So I think, I don't know, yeah, I've got faith that there's more sort of context and more kind of scope for exploring a lot of the ideas in the book through the sorceress's involvement.
Yeah, it definitely doesn't feel like something that was done thoughtlessly in service of the story. It seems like something that is definitely a noted part of the narrative and like will affect it in some way. So no big deal on that one. Although, like, scratching my head a little bit a couple times here and there to be like, why would you do this to people you like? I guess the second one's kind of actually tied into that scene you were mentioning, Cal, where Niobe like unveils the gesh. Shouldn't like magical contracts take intent into account? Like, they signed this contract and they didn't know what they were doing at all. Like, it feels like a magical contract especially would take your knowledge of what's going on into account.
Yeah, I feel like fairies and the Fae make deals with humans when they don't understand the price that they're going to pay all the time, Matt. What are you talking about?
I mean, that's fair. She is evil, potentially, right? So it's not like she's here to make a fair deal.
It's
look at Rumpelstiltskin. Come on.
And not just to keep sort of dangling the contents of the second book, but like there's a substantial amount of that book is about lawyers arguing. I think that's maybe the least spoilery way that I can put it.
I don't think you could have possibly intrigued me any more for the second book. This gets my very specific interests.
Oh yeah. Sorry, I'd forgotten about Boston Legal, but yes, I think that there is a genuinely exhilarating magical court case in the second book that I think again suggests to me that like the ideas of fairness and the law and contracts are considered parts of this story, I think.
See, I understand why authors don't front load their books with lore and world building because they don't want to scare off potential readers. But I think I am in the opposite camp where, like, I grew up on reading fantasy books that you open the first page and there's a map. And you look at all the maps and then you can turn to the back and there's an appendix with like characters and definitions. It's like, I need that. And this is like reverse for me. And this is like, what, the second or third comic now, Matt, that we've had It gets better in the second and third volume. They got all the stuff that I'm looking for in the first one.
To be fair, I'm trying to think of it because like one of them for sure is Fables, right? Which we talked about.
Yes. Yep.
And we were like, oh, like it gets, if not better, at least more involved.
Right.
I'm trying to think what the other. Oh, Atomic Robo, right? Was the one of the other ones? Okay, I'm just trying to like put them on a scale of which one. I guess you should tell me, like, at a scale of which one.
I don't need to like scale them. Like,
no, I'm just trying to figure it out, right?
Trope
like,
that we run into now numerous times that they're like, and I get it. It's to get a wider audience, you want to slip them into this world as opposed to like, here's a wall of text. I need you to understand the motivations for everyone, where they're coming from. And I can see how that would scare people away. But personally,
give me that wall.
I appreciate the backstories and the motivations on the get-go. And then it's like, oh my God, that person just did that thing, but they're from this house. That's going to piss off this faction. Oh my God, what are they going to do?
You want like full Shakespeare, is what you're saying.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and you brought in, and in your notes, Matt, you referenced like a few of the animes and stuff. You said this reminds you of like Naruto and that kind of stuff. And part of the reason why I like Naruto is the characters and their motivations and like the different ninja tribes and like why they have motivations, so that anything that happens with these stupid kids has larger ramifications for the world that they're in.
I mean, this is going to have larger ramifications. They're trying to figure out who's the leader of this country.
I'm impatient now. I want world building.
No, I mean, you're definitely not getting the like 5-minute scene where everyone comes on stage and says, I am Naruto. I used to be a fox child and this is my deal. Like, you're not getting that for sure. So,
right. Which again, I completely understand why that's not a thing.
I think that there may be a couple of reasons for it as well, potentially. I think one of them is that in any interviews I've seen with Alexis Deakin, they've spoken about, you know, sort of effectively the entire story of the 3 books being conceived in one go, and it just, you know, sort of being broken up to make it manageable effectively, as, you know, sort of like as a I guess like a commercial opportunity. So I think, and I think that definitely plays out in the in the second book, which feels it feels like an utterly seamless transition from one to the other. So I think that there is maybe that sense, and you do get an awful lot more sort of backstory for key characters in that book as well. So I think that there is maybe that reasoning behind, you know, sort of the fact that it isn't front loaded with exposition in this book. But I think something that I was thinking about a lot when preparing for this episode was about just sort of like what makes something feel like a fairy tale. And I think that one of the things that is true of all sort of like good fairy tales is that you just get dropped into a world and there's not really an explanation of anything, and it is just, you're just required to just sort of go with the rules that you're or like the setting or the people that you're you know suddenly surrounded by. And it very much has that kind of sense of, I don't know, kind of like confidence, I think, that sometimes comes with like, yeah, again, just like really effective fairy tales where it doesn't feel like it's necessarily bothered about bringing people on board that aren't already there. I don't know if that translates. If that makes
absolutely.
Sense.
That was very diplomatic phrasing, by the
way. But yeah, so I think that there are those kind of things. Because I think there's even with the different characters within the book, you don't get a huge amount of information about, you know, sort of what the relative status or power is of different people. I mean, I think you can work it out by sort of like judging their interactions with each other or like how they look at themselves. But yeah, there's no family trees or sort of maps of the kingdom to
I just want to know like what a kite lord is and why.
I know, it's exciting, isn't it?
Well, I mean, it has war kites, so do you know that at least?
I did.
A point in your favor, Pat, is like I had to look back through the book after having read it 3 times, at least a couple times, to pull out people's names while I was writing my notes. So like, which I don't think is super important because each of the characters are so like they look so unique, so you know who's who when you're looking at a page. Like I couldn't quite pull each of them apart to the degree that I wanted to or needed to put like the notes for my discussion together without actually going back and like sitting with a page for more than, like the amount of time that someone would take to read this book. So like I guess that's like a point in your favor, but I also agree, I think more with Cal that like,
I'm not saying
I
I'm
think
right
again
or
this
wrong,
kind of
by the way. I'm not
no, I know it's an interesting
you
discussion.
always want
is
to
what I'm
rank
saying.
things,
Like,
Matt, but I'm just saying.
I do, I really do. It drives Cat crazy, actually. I do. It's the way my brain works, but like at the same time, and I think we've had this discussion too, especially with like that Green Lantern episode we
Yes.
recorded, where like because my brain is primed on intricate superhero comics that like it knows that might not make sense in the moment, but will once you link them up with the comics from 20 years ago or the comics from like 5 years from now.
Mm-hmm.
I think you've just explained to me why you like Grant Morrison so much, because
this is what I was going to say, actually, the exact
works.
thing. Is like, so the specific panel you're like the what you said about fairy tales reminded me of, Pat, and also or what you said about fairy tales, Cal, and what you were talking about, Pat. There's a specific Batman and Robin panel where Dick Grayson is shoving Jason Todd as the Red Hood onto a table while Jason Todd's trying to explain like how he got to the state he's in right now. And Dick Grayson shoves him on a table as like backstory, not interested, and the story moves on from there. So yeah, that's my take on it. That's my opinion. Is that panel of Batman and Robin, which I have to find for the show notes now.
And I wholly admit that I'm judging the first volume of a trilogy based on my preferences of series, like other medium that I've consumed. Like Matt, you compared this to Avatar: The Last Airbender. Like I've watched that a few times and I know all the backstories, but if you watched episode 1, Boy in the Iceberg, it's a completely different feel from the last season of it. So.
Yeah. Which I think just takes time. Like most shows kind of get like that, I think, where the first season is sort of set up, and then once you've got so many pieces that have already started interconnecting.
Right.
I'm trying to think about this versus, like, say, a Sandman, which I know you've talked about wanting to read for the podcast in the future, right? Like,
Absolutely.
I'm trying to remember like how much a Sandman did or didn't just like drop you into it, and I honestly don't remember off the top of my head because it's been so long since I read that first volume.
It pretty much drops you straight in, I think, or at the very least, like the scope of the book expands exponentially later on, and there are references to plenty of things early doors that aren't, sort of explained A until much later, or B ever at all. So I think it's got
the Dreamland stuff. I remember being thrown the first time reading it with all like Cain and Abel and that kind of stuff. It's like, well, okay, this is weird. What's going on?
But no, like it's always an interesting discussion to have, and like I think comics do that more too because they can lean so much on the visual aspect, whereas a fantasy novel is more apt to give you this whole rundown of like the entire intricate political or magical or whatever structure behind it because you can't show things as easily. Whereas in a comic, you can definitely just like put a character on a page and it doesn't really matter what their name is. Cause like I think Archer, I had to look up his name 2 or 3 times, even though he's like my favorite character in the book.
Archer,
yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I think another thing is because it's got such a wide cast of characters, and people are already dying, that like the Chamberlain, I don't have strong opinions about him dying and becoming like a wolf zombie because like I got one half profile of him looking a little fishy and that's about it. So I don't know who that guy was or what his standing was in court.
To be fair, the only thing you need to know about that is that it's super creepy.
Yeah.
Well, like he's called Chamberlain, so the first thing I think of is the Dark Crystal, and like I didn't like that character, so obviously he's probably not a nice guy if he's a Chamberlain. And like he lands in the middle of wolves, so like I feel like the sorceress didn't give him as much chance as it gave the other people. But
well, it was entirely random, Pat.
Was it? Okay. Well,
I honestly don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if it's not.
I believe it to be entirely random, and I think, I mean, from like a narrative point of view, from what I can work out, I think that the role of the Chamberlain, other than providing like a genuinely horrifying image when he comes back in his sort of skeletal form, is to make you feel mounting dread about what is going to happen to, I suppose, particularly Ben, when you realise that he is going to forfeit his life without even realising what the consequences are. I think that one of the things that that stands out to me about the book is, I think it goes back to what I think something you were saying earlier, Matt, about the strength of the character designs, because certainly within this first book, you don't get a particularly deep understanding of different characters. I think you get exactly what you need, which is either their sort of narrative function or kind of like one big bold personality trait about them. So you have, sort of Io being strong-willed and but like fundamentally good. You've got Nephis, Nemes, who is fundamentally, I suppose, weak-willed and unkind, and then sort of people in between as well. But I think that's all that you need in this first book, just to sort of get you through. And then I suppose, as you were saying as well, Matt, like the cast is being whittled down, and that continues quite dramatically into the second book as well.
I was gonna say, there can't be that many people that make it into the second book, because 50 is a big cast, and as a person who's tried to write 6 people, that's tough.
Yes, that trend continues. I think that's the least spoilery way I can put that.
I have a bit that you just touched on that I want to circle back to, but I had another question first, so I'm trying to remind myself that to circle back to the other thing. Most important question first, though. Did you guys have a favorite character or contender in the book?
I liked the chief judge.
Nice, good. Well,
her character is
well,
the archetype that I appreciate.
You should read the second book.
I would imagine.
Just it seems like there will be more lawyering.
I don't know. She seems like a very wise and talented lady, and she's no nonsense. She knows that language of the people that she lands in, so she doesn't get pitchforked.
Yeah, I guess notably the only character I think we saw that didn't have to overcome a physical trial to get back, right?
Well, the potential was there that she could have fought. If it was the leader of the army, I'm sure he would have whipped out swords and started chopping off heads.
If it was any D&D party, that would have been a fight, right?
Yeah, she's no murder hobo. She can talk. She's got high charisma. She's good. And then she also realized that shit's going down. She comes back and sees Io and Nemes freaking out. It's okay, well, something just happened here.
She's also only one of 2 characters that we see that questions the contract at the start as well, which I feel is another good point in her favor.
Yeah.
I think that's rule number 1 when you become a lawyer. Is don't just sign stuff without reading it. Come on. Yeah, I like her.
I think that's a good choice. I think for me, it's either. Arta is phenomenal. I really, really love Arta. And I'll be interested to know how much of your affection from Matt comes down to the fact that he's dressed exactly like sort of early Dick Grayson Robin. In a way that I've never seen commented on, but it's
maybe
it's all that I can think about.
I hadn't noticed it, but I'm going to look now.
Take a look at any panel that he's in. He's. I think he's such a perfect kind of comic relief character, and there is. I think one of the things that I really enjoy about this book is just how expressive and fun, all of the character design and the kind of the acting in is it. And I think because he's such a comic kind of over the top, silly character, that you get to see a lot of Alexis Deacon's kind of real strengths as an illustrator in sort of any moment of comedy with Arta. So I think probably in this book, Arta, I think.
Yeah, I enjoyed that he got to be comedic without sacrifice, without being a caricature, I guess, too. He has someone...
He was a little caricature.
he has someone he loves. He goes to that hotel, but then shows up and has that, entire sequence where he's trying to figure out how to reload the rifle he borrowed.
It's astonishingly good, that sequence.
It really is, right? Split it up into 10 separate steps and 10 separate panels on the bottom of a page like that. Oh, so good.
Yeah. How about you, Matt?
I think it is either Arthur or it's Io. I do really enjoy that Io's response to the whole thing is kind of in the similar way to the judge, not to just immediately decide. She's very contrasted with Nemes, right? Where his immediate reaction is to selfishly be like, well, I got to kill all of them. Whereas Io's reaction is like, I got to learn about this so that we can all live.
Yeah. And I think that maybe in like a less flashy way, but I think that Io's a character that, again, it's got like a really interesting, like fun design, and is, I think maybe because it's like such like a simple, striking design for her character, I feel like you can pick up a lot about her personality and her sort of motivations and sort of qualities as a person just through some like the way that she's depicted as well. So like even beyond kind of dialogue or like what it is, that she's doing plot wise, there are some panels like on page 67. If you turn to that, there's a panel of her sort of like staring directly at the reader after she's been burnt by the sun, and it's such like a, I don't know. There's a number of different panels like that just like really give you a strong insight into what she's about, and I find that like really compelling as well.
Yeah, she's quite intense, right? Especially for a person who is at least seemingly younger than everyone else in this contest.
Yeah. But yeah, is like also, I don't know, just, and I think that the book does a good job of kind of doling out additional insights into who she is and like what she's capable of. I'm thinking of when she first pulls a crossbow on Nemus after they have their sort of fights, after immediately finding out about the terms of the contest, and it is really effective, I think. Sort of discovering these like hidden depths to her as a character, and then I guess we touched on it before as well, but the reveal of the war kite as well is it's just really exciting and well done as well, I think, and just speaks a lot to some of the interesting but like unstated things about her as a character.
Yeah, and that same moment with Nemas too, where she pulls out the crossbow, she also gets him to try to talk about the contest, and that makes him retch. So like, it shows her cleverness right there too, which she then backs up by immediately like going to the library, which is the solution to all life's problems, I think.
I don't know that. I was promised a thing with that library sequence and like cover image, and that did not follow through for me.
It's like, I appreciate that this is going to sound maybe less charming each time I say it, but there is more that pays off with that trip to the library in the second book.
Okay,
so,
good, because
we gotta start reading second volumes, is what we're saying.
I was ready for like, okay, this is it. This the cool image on the cover where she's climbing through piles of books and like a creepy thing is behind her, and she talks to a weird lady, and they explain death and life magic, and then they get a book that's going to answer everything, and there's a worm in it. It's like, well, that scene was a theme. Let's keep going.
Most every time Tyler Marifke's been on this podcast, he's had us read a second volume of a book and not the first, and maybe that's just what we need to do.
He's on to something. There we go.
It does. I mean, I agree with you. I think it, like the book, you can get to the end of it, and it was. I remember feeling a specific kind of frustration when I first finished it and realised that I had to wait, sort of about 18 months, I think it was at that point, for the second book. But if you were to kind of like list out everything that happens in the book, it crams in a genuinely wild amount into that. I think it's just that nothing is like lingered on for too long. So you might have a series of momentous events happening for a character that take place over like no more than 3 pages, and then you just on to the next thing straight away, and it's just got this really kind of breathless feel to it that I think, I don't know, sort of might leave the impression of it being slighter than it is, but I'm also not 100% sure if that's also, if my perspective on that is informed by sort of, again, knowledge of what happens further into the series, and then attributing more significance to things that you maybe see in like 2 panels that then are sort of played out in a much bigger way further down the road.
Absolutely. And I've got sort of an insatiable appetite when it comes to comic books. Wasn't it Saga that I read like the first 4 volumes, Matt, in one sitting?
Yeah. Yes, you're very
So when I get into a thing, I want to read more of that thing, and I want to read it now.
I was going to say, I read them very quickly, but I usually reread them. I'm not sure if you're a rereader or not, Pat.
Eventually. But you got to get the end first, and then you reread it.
Oh, see, I'll reread like in the process for sure. Yeah, I think what bears out what you were saying, Cal, a little bit was one of my other favorite moments in the book was just Ben returning home and being like, I bowed out, which is like a 2-page sequence basically, and like the bit of it I like the most is the 3 panels where basically he and his wife are in bed. He's like, I don't really want to talk about it right now. I feel like you get a lot of character in just those 2 pages even, and like I don't know, it compresses a lot into the short amount of pages that there are, I think.
I feel like they had to get rid of that character because it was too similar to Arthur. I don't know.
Sort of, yeah. Like I kind of get that.
They felt like the same character to me.
I think he's less hapless than Otter. But yeah, I mean, I think that they're both characters that are easy to latch onto, right? Which is what makes the sequence where you see the candle like very slowly going out before he's like as he falls asleep, and then just a really big panel on the screen when presumably his wife wakes up and finds that something very bad has happened to Ben. It's a I don't know. Yeah, I think it's a really effective sequence. That page 64. If anybody's flicking through.
Yeah, I agree. Especially because you see him show up like at the very end too. Like he's one of the most notable wraiths that descends upon Nemoth.
Yeah. No, it's I think again, yeah. Just I think the book does always like just enough to maximize the impact of any given moment. And again, I think having a familiar face that we feel some affection towards makes that sort of end scene with the crowd just that bit more horrific as well. And for me, I think sort of helps to get me on side with Io's decision to save Nemoth in that position, because it looks like a genuinely awful fate to be I don't know to be out of the competition.
Well, it's interesting that the Lord Chamberlain became this weird wolf man, and then
I know I was looking forward to other like mutants and stuff. Oh, they're just great people. Okay.
I think this is entirely headcanon, but I do wonder if it has something to do with like the nature of your death. And I
think it has to, right? Because I was just thinking about this now, how when Io was struck by the sun, she also became kind of one of those, like one of those specific wraiths.
Yeah.
So it must just be all the people who died as a result of failing the challenge because the sun came up.
Yeah, and the Chamberlain is coloured differently to Ben and the others that in that crowd as well. So I do wonder if there's meant to be some kind of dramatic irony to how you come back if you drop out of the competition.
But again, I feel like the sorceress admits that I don't need to kill you. I'm just going to kill you.
Yeah, yeah.
That's not part of the thing. I just want to kill you.
It's I think that the characterization of the sorceress is fun as well. I think that the sort of magical battle that she has with Eloise in the middle of the book is really enjoyable and effective, and part of that is because like the visuals are just really interesting and weird, and sort of the big wooden sort of I don't know, colossus thing that she becomes is just a really unique and interesting design. But I think that there's also this sense of the sorceress is like having a good time as well, which is like enjoyable, I think, and sort of takes it a level beyond just sort of an evil force being evil for its own sake. Because certainly in this book, you don't really get much insight into why they're doing it. But I think that the playfulness in that scene is an interesting sort of extra bit of shading on that character.
I do want to know what Eloise did to Archer's hat. Takes it off, and then explodes it, and then says death magic. It's like, okay, all right.
I mean, it got the point across, right?
Death magic bad.
It's pretty good, particularly after presumably he must have had to go to some additional work to get his hat back after the quicksand at the start of the story. Poor Otter. There is, and I promise this will be the last time, but I just sort of vaguely alluded to something from the second book. But the second book, Arthur is naked for almost the entirety of it, and so there is maybe just like this is possibly the seeding of a running joke about him just having fewer and fewer clothes,
just losing clothes throughout.
Yeah.
Third book, he'll lose his glasses.
Well.
Oh no, poor guy.
He finally had time. He had time.
I think it is a book with a sense of humor as well. I mean, I guess we've touched on that a bit already with like some of the slapstick stuff with or more slapstick elements without it. But I think it's fantasy isn't always a genre that like I'm like immediately super interested in, and I think that that's because in maybe too many versions of it that I've read, or like too many versions of like contemporary fantasy, there's like a real self-seriousness about it, and I don't think I think this book is very earnest, but I don't think it's self-serious either. I don't know if you guys have got any thoughts on that.
You're saying fantasy taking itself too seriously?
I think that can be. I think that's been my experience with a lot of sort of like modern fantasy stuff, which is that like that it can be quite humorless at times.
I think a lot
it's
of
a big
people
generalization, but
who enjoy fantasy, or like who enjoy fantasy enough that they want to write their own, remember the parts of Lord of the Rings where like people are fighting or trudging up the mountains and don't remember like Tom Bombadil.
no, that's
Does
a good
that make
point.
sense? Like,
No,
I mean, even when you
that's
get
super
them like
interesting. Yeah.
cut down to the movies, like a lot of that stuff leaves and it becomes pretty, not completely, but a lot like a straight up drama, right? So like I think those are the parts that stick with people, and then that's what they bring to their own take on it without like realizing that they did actually enjoy the other stuff too. Maybe that's, I don't know, that's an in the moment hypothesis, so may need to be tested. But
no, I think there's a lot to that, definitely. I think one of the things I was thinking about when preparing for this episode was like other fantasy comics, first of all, and sort of how I thought it compared to them, but also then sort of more broadly fantasy literature. And I think there's a number of like fantasy novels from the last sort of 20 years that I've really genuinely loved, but I think it's as a genre as a whole, I think it's often kind of pigeonholed as basically sort of just Tolkien or a Tolkien or something that's explicitly reacting against that. And so it's like it was nice for me to see something that felt really distinct and felt like it had an identity of its own, and it wasn't just a play on something else. It felt like a fully formed, coherent world.
Yeah,
that
its
you
own
didn't need
thing. Yeah, and I'm thinking about like all three of those sort of major influences or not influences, but like sort of things that were connected in my brain to this. And like Tintin, funny. Ghibli movies, usually funny. Avatar, funny. Like, so that sort of makes sense. And like I enjoy all of those things too, so I guess it makes sense that I enjoyed this also. I also like a little dash of humor in my drama.
Yeah, no, I think it matters, particularly when there are elements of this book that are exceptionally sort of harrowing and bleak as well. I think for something that's, I presume, aimed at kind of like quite a broad audience. Like I don't think it's specifically aimed at children, but there's nothing in here that you couldn't. I don't know. There's no sort of content warning that you'd need to apply to it other than spooky Chamberlain people.
I mean, you said you bought it for your niece, right?
Yeah, I did, and she enjoyed it. I do remember her being a bit disturbed by the bit where Eloise's tongue got ripped out.
Yeah, that.
Yeah. Even then, there's no blood; it just flies away.
Yes, yeah, no, that's true. Yeah, but I think it was enough to sort of make an impression on my next.
But I mean, that's fairy tales, right? And like grim fairy tales is pretty horrific when you get down to it.
No, that's true.
How old was your niece at the time?
Probably about. I mean, she wouldn't have been more than like 8. I don't think so. I think it was. Yeah, I don't know. maybe probably like a touch too young for it.
I think kids can handle more than we give them these days. Like I think of all like the Don Bluth cartoons that we watched, the movies. Like there's some pretty. Fievel had some pretty messed up imagery in it. All dogs go to heaven. I mean, come on. So I think kids can handle it, and I think it makes a greater impact on them. Because you've got the strong sense of good and evil, and into that.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think, and again, just to keep bringing up this point, I think that's another element of the sort of where I think it's grasped what it takes to be an effective fairy tale. Is it has like a really clear sense of morality, and I don't think it's like necessarily a simple one. It's not it's not like a purely kind of like binary right or wrong thing. I think that we're meant to feel conflicted about Io's decision to rescue Nemes at the end. I don't think that that's I think that's meant to be more complicated for the audience than it is for Io in that moment. And again, that kind of slight, like a clear sense of morality, but at the same time a bit of an ambivalence towards it, I think is very sort of fairy tale to me.
So that kind of circles back to the second big question I had that I was going to force myself to remember from forever ago. Is you had called Nemas weak-willed when you were talking about him a while ago, and like obviously it's a podcast, spur of the moment, whatever. But I don't know that like that's the specific word I would go with. Like I don't think he's weak-willed. I think he's selfish, and I think he's a little bit self-aggrandizing. But like I don't know if I would put that as like it takes a lot of spirit to do the terrible things he's doing. I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I don't know. There's a moment near the back of the book where Io asks him if his life is that much more important than the rest of theirs, and he says, yes, no, I don't know, or something to that effect. And like that felt so honest to me of like if you operate within the rules of the contest, which Io doesn't want to, but he's not like Nemas has not figured out that that's even an option. Like if you operate within the rules of the contest, 49 of them will die and one of them will live. So like with those notions set, like what do you do at that point?
Well, I think I think that's a fair point. I don't think that he's reacting in a sort of completely irrational manner at all. And yeah, I think you're right as well that he's like committing to the choice that he's made, even if he doesn't feel 100% confident about it. But I think that in this book and again later in the series, you're meant to contrast him and Io and see them as like very distinct and oppositional kind of philosophical points of view. And I think it maybe it's just in contrast to her, who immediately I don't think she refuses to be bound by the terms of the game immediately, whereas he immediately submits to the rules that the sorceress has put in front of them. I think.
And I suppose in that sense, like weak-willed is the correct word.
Yeah, but no, I think you're right though. He's not. Maybe it's just that he is less imaginative. Maybe that's the way.
No, absolutely right. Like the fact that he's killing people while Io is distinctly saving people, I think puts them at odds.
Is there something to be said about like gender roles in this, and the fact that he's a man and that men can work within a system to rise in power? Like he sees an opportunity in the rules that are set out for him to become chieftain, and Io, the daughter of the Kite Lord, I mean, obviously looked down upon as not one of the greats, would have to work outside the system to get that kind of power and respect.
Yeah, I think that's definitely part of it, and I think there's also maybe. So I'm not sure how clear this is, or like whether this all stood out to you guys. But Nemes is the younger brother of the sort of the chief of the army, and I think that there is maybe a specific kind of I don't know sort of competitional victory or like sense of what victory is that he's picked up from there. I think that's probably a fair reading as well.
Yeah, and I actually noticed that we don't really get to see the chief of the army again after that initial sequence. That feels like one of those things that's gonna be big later on, most likely.
Yes, it will.
You didn't do it this time. I did it.
Yes. Yes. There we go. I'm sticking to my own rules, but not bringing it up again. But yes.
I know. Reading this, I could really see why you like this, Cal, because it reminded me a lot of 100 Nights of Hero. Both in style of the art, but also it's a matriarchal society. The dead chieftain was a woman. The positions of power are held by women. The main character is a very strong, independent woman, young girl.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. I hadn't actually considered that before, but yes, I think you're. I need to reread. I need to reread this and the second one with that lens, because I think that there's probably quite a lot to that. And I think it's in the maybe in a similar way to the 100 Nights of Hero as well. It feels like it's a story that feels like familiar and unfamiliar at the same time. I think that it's using a lot of kind of structural beats or sort of basic story ideas that have been done elsewhere, but it's got such a strong unique identity as a book, like partly through the visuals. I don't think I've seen any books that look like this before. Like the art style is just astonishing, but also, yeah, I don't know, the way that it is just really confidently going about telling the story without, I think without kind of like looking around to see if people are keeping up with it. And not that I think it's difficult to sort of particularly keep up with it, but there's no hand holding, and I think that was probably true with the 100 Nights of Hero as well. I think that's a good comparison.
Yeah, I think it says something that we've gone through the entire first book and first challenge, and I don't really know what the second challenge will be. I know they'll all be in the castle, but like other than that, I don't know what's going to happen because it is a contest that we've seen similar structures for before. There are things going on in the background, and like each of the different characters is behaving in such a way that like I can't tell what's going to happen, which is a pretty big feat for me, a person who has read hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of stories. It is nice. It's always nice to be surprised as a reader.
Yeah, I think that definitely continues into the second book, and I think I mentioned this to you earlier in the week when we were chatting, Matt. But the second book ends on such like an unexpected and exciting note that the first time after I read it for the first time, I had to just go and do some like press ups for a bit just to work out the weird energy that I was feeling at that point.
That is also part of the reason I've delayed buying the second one. Is like I keep looking at the publication date for the third one, and I'm like, it's a little too soon.
It's I think it's June. All things being well, June of next year, right?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah. No, I'm very excited.
Yeah, I guess, is there anything else you guys want to say about the book before we move into our recommendations segment?
No. It's just a really nice book. I'm just saying, like I'm looking at the binding, like the front and back cover, like it's got the cool like glyphs. We're talking about the fact that the sorceress and Eloise use different fonts when they're casting. I'm pretty sure the glyphs on the back and front inside covers are like death magic.
Yes, you can decode them as well.
Really?
There's a specific message written in this. It's the same in the second book as well.
I see X-Men now, so now I'm going through.
Yeah, but yeah, there's function to that as well as just being sort of very attractive set dressing in the
Please
book.
tell me the message.
I did decode it a few years ago, and I can't remember what it is now, but I think. My vague recollection is that each one kind of gives quite a strong hint about what's going to be happening in the next book. So that's as confident a recollection of it as I feel like I can provide at the moment. But
the X-Men are going to show up in the next one?
Oh god, yeah. Sorry, I've just seen the X-Men bit as well.
Right?
Well, that's interesting. Well, I mean, if it'll get you to buy the second book, then I'm very happy to.
Crossover I did not see coming. So
just keep on telling Pat that the judge is a very big character in the second book. He'll get there.
The judge is a really big character in the second book. You get a really fun and interesting sort of like maybe 2 or 3 page sequence of their backstory, which ends with I think one of the funniest punchlines that I've read in a comic, which I think is, again, I'm trying not to like stray too much into like spoiling anything, but there's a punchline to their backstory that is like genuinely laugh out loud funny, I think. But yeah, okay. Do you want to do recommendations then?
Yeah, I think despite the fact that Pat disagrees with me, this has really strong Avatar: The Last Airbender vibes to me. So like, I've been meaning to get a big rewatch in anyways, so that's my recommendation. I was trying to think of a comic, and I think for a lot of the reasons you were saying, Cal, where it feels a little different than everything else that I've read to me, like, or at least notably different, that I didn't have a good comics recommendation.
Sort of gives me Bones vibe. I don't know.
Oh, a little bit.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
can see that.
I mean, Bone is much more dense for sure, but it also has the funny next to the fantastic,
The serious, yeah.
Yeah, that's really
That's a good
So I
interesting.
guess that's one of my recommendations. And I also was thinking of Stardust,
Yeah, I can see that as well.
the competition to see who's going to be the next king, thrown into a fantasy world that you don't know the rules of, and trying to figure out where you land. Also, evil witches. Got to watch out.
I was trying to think of a good like manga to recommend based off this because like it does give me such strong like.
I was thinking
Yeah,
Tower
yeah.
of God. I watched the anime. I haven't read the manga, but
Okay, I mean I've read a little bit of it on Webtoon and like yeah, could see. It's not quite as there's I don't
fairy
know what the
tale.
best. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Like it's a little bit more. I don't feel like it's quite as immersive. Also, if that makes
No,
sense.
it's not.
For me, there's probably a couple that I'd recommend on the back of this. One of them is a book called Beautiful Darkness, which is definitely a European comic by Fabian Vellman, and I can't remember the artist's name, and I feel very bad about that now. But it's got similar the art style. I think it's got the same kind of like painterly, sort of like really interesting art. In terms of the actual content as well, I think it does a really good job of being a sort of very sad and slightly scary fairy tale that just sort of spools out without really explaining too much about itself, and just you have to kind of go with it almost as a sort of mood piece. So that's one that I definitely recommend. I think if anybody enjoyed this,
Nice.
We'll be sure to check that out.
it's really good. I recommend it very highly. It will be like it's one that I feel it's a much more kind of arduous read than this. I think in that it goes to much bleaker and unpleasant places, but it is similarly interesting and unique, I think.
Maybe next year then.
Yeah. I think it's for a few years it's been like a real sort of premium that I've placed on like any story that I'm reading about like how much it values kindness, and I think that this book definitely does that. And I think that it makes a very clear judgment that is the better way of doing things.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the ending makes that pretty clear.
Yeah. But I'm just trying to think. I think that probably has been subconsciously reflected in most of the stuff that I've gravitated towards this year, just because it feels like a good and necessary kind of booster, right?
Yeah. Which this was a great book for it. So thank you for having us read it.
Yeah, thanks, Kyle.
You're very welcome. No, thank you very much, and thank you very much for having me on as well. I really enjoyed this, so thank you very much.
I think that's going to do it for this month's discussion of Geis.
Yeah.
I almost did it wrong, I swear. As always, if you want to get in touch with Pat or myself, you can find us on Twitter as @WattPodcast. You can also email us at waitingonthetrade@gmail.com and read more comics-related goodness at mattreadscomics.com. Cal, where can people find you online, assuming you want to be found?
I've actually since the last episode, I've decided that I don't want to be found. So
That's
just leave it at
fair.
that.
Solid choice.
I'm mostly doing that this year also, so... Well, I'm delighted that you came online to chat with us, Cal. Appreciate it.
Yeah. No, yeah, and yeah, genuinely, thank you so much. I had a really good time.